I'm here at the Gettysburg National Military Park Museum and Visitors Center, where owing to COVID-19 hysteria, the Visitors Center is closed. However, the park remains open. People can visit it. So feel free to join me today for a virtual tour of the Gettysburg battle sites, some of the key engagements that took place in the Battle of Gettysburg from July 1st to July 3rd, 1863, in what was known as the high tide of the Confederacy, in which Confederate forces under the Army of Northern Virginia, under General Robert E. Lee, were defeated here at Gettysburg by forces under General George G. Meade from the Union. I'll be covering specific engagements and highlights and some of the challenges that the forces on both sides faced as they fought this decisive battle here at Gettysburg. It was the second attempt to invade the North by General Lee, his first having occurred in Antietam the previous year, and now once again he made another effort to invade the North to bring the war to a close in favor of the Confederacy. However, at this site in Gettysburg, a few 100,000 troops from both sides engaged in a decisive conflict that was the battle that turned the tide and marked the high tide point of the Confederacy. So join me now for a virtual tour on the Indaba Africa channel. So I'm here at Gettysburg, and on the 2nd of July, 1863, General Hancock, commander of the 2nd Corps, passed through this spot in the center of the Union lines. There were no regiments available save one, and that regiment was the 1st Minnesota. The 1st Minnesota stepped up and gallantly took the direction to charge into the lines to stop the Alabamans who were coming through the center of the Union forces. Outnumbered 4-1, the 1st Minnesota, in a gallant action, fixed bayonets and charged. 262 soldiers and officers went into that bayonet charge. At the end of that engagement, only 47 had not been killed or seriously wounded. In one of those gallant actions of Gettysburg, often forgotten, while people remember Little Round Top, they remember the 20th Maine. They seldom remember the 1st Minnesotans and the sacrifice they made here at Gettysburg to preserve the Union and end the institution of slavery. As we approach the anniversary coming up very soon, of the first week of July, for the Battle of Gettysburg, it's just a time to remember the sacrifices many have made, veterans of all races, of all ethnicities, who've supported and defended the Constitution of these United States to protect our freedoms and those of others around the world. So this is the view that the 1st Minnesota Regiment had as the Alabamans advanced into the center of the Union ranks, 2nd Corps here on the 2nd of July, 1863. You can see just a few hundred meters in front of this position, the terrain drops off where those trees are growing, which is a runoff where water flows through. And that dip would have kept the Alabamans out of visual observation for the 1st Minnesotans for a fair portion of their advance. Also presented an obstacle for the Minnesotans as they charged into the Confederate ranks, not knowing what lay ahead and wait for them. Yet nonetheless, the 1st Minnesota gallantly charged. Minnesota, a state very far removed geographically from Gettysburg and very far removed from the institution of slavery for the most part. Yet here they were in central Pennsylvania on a brutally hot summer day, sacrificing all that they had for this great nation. 262 Minnesotans charged, bayonets fixed into the Confederate ranks, outnumbered 4-1. Only 47 of them came out of that unscraped, unscathed, or still alive. On July 2nd, 1863, General Robert E. Lee with the Army of Northern Virginia here at Gettysburg decided to attack the Union front on two ends, at Cemetery Hill in the north, in what was a diversionary attack or a feint, while the main effort was supposed to be concentrated here on the southern end of the Gettysburg battlefield, with General Longstreet moving his corps to the south in an effort to flank and roll up the Union Army. The plan was to go through Big Round Top, which you see behind me, to the side of that tree, and then Little Round Top to the other side, as the Confederate forces would roll up the Union flank. But unknown to the Confederates, and since it took an extremely long time for Longstreet to get his 15,000 troops from his corps into position for the attack by the Confederates didn't begin until 4 p.m. on the 2nd of July. In the meantime, Sickles' Corps, the 3rd Union Corps, without orders, moved on to Little Round Top and Big Round Top, the high ground, occupying it unbeknownst to Longstreet and his corps, which ultimately led to the battle with the 20th Maine and Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain of fame from the movie Gettysburg and the book Killer Angels. And I'll cover that in just a few moments in another video. Behind me is what's known as Devil's Den, this rocky spot on the battlefield here at Gettysburg, which Hood's division sought to dislodge federal troops from. Scores of casualties occurred here, and to the side there, that area became known as the slaughter pen for so many people having fallen here in the desperate struggle to dislodge Union troops. Eventually, the Confederates took over position here and were successful taking over the spot, and they used it to put their sharpshooters in place to fire back onto Little Round Top, back over there where Union troops were placed, causing severe number of casualties as well for the Union troops. This is one of the most desperate spots in the battle here at Gettysburg. It took place on the 2nd of July after Longstreet's corps moved into position. Hood's division was given this angle to attack, and it was not favorable to the Confederates. The view from Devil's Den and the slaughter pen, looking up to Little Round Top, and you can see the desperate terrain that the Confederates had to climb to scale to reach Union forces under Colonel Strong Vincent's brigade, which arrived just in time, just before 4 p.m. as the Confederates made their rush up there to capture Little Round Top. The timely arrival of Union troops that, had it not occurred, would have changed the outcome of the Battle of Gettysburg significantly, most likely resulting in a victory for the Army of Northern Virginia, as Confederate forces from Hood's division and Longstreet's corps would have been able to roll up the flank of the Union Army from that angle. This is the view from Little Round Top, the site where on the 2nd of July, as the Confederate attack at about 4 p.m. began, Colonel Strong Vincent and his 1,300-man Union Infantry Brigade rushed to defend this hill, arriving just in time as Texans and Alabamans from General Hood's division began to advance up the hill. Vince's forces drove them back, but Hood's Texans and Alabamans were a determined bunch, and they continued to push forward. And only the timely intervention of the 140th New York Infantry, led by Colonel Patrick O'Rourke, made the difference as the New Yorkers rushed down the hill to charge the Texans and Alabamans and push this back. In this engagement, both Colonel Strong Vincent and Colonel O'Rourke both died in the conflict at this battle here on Little Round Top. I'll move forward so that folks can get a better view and appreciation for what exactly we're dealing with here on Little Round Top. This is the terrain that the Confederates attempted to advance up. Devil's Den is down there where you see all those rocks and those cars. And Big Round Top is located over there to the south. What a daunting challenge for the Confederate forces as they sought to flank the Union Army here at Little Round Top. Just a quick glance of the terrain we're talking about here on the extreme flank of the Union Army on the 2nd of July, 1863, after Colonel Strong Vincent placed the 20th Maine on this spot and told Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain to hold at all hazards. Not exactly the sort of terrain that you want to be marching up after forced marches to get here, firing at the troops up there behind rocks in an effort to unseat them, dislodge the Union forces, and roll up the Union flank that goes up the rest of Little Round Top here to the left. Can you imagine wearing wool uniforms, over 90 degrees Fahrenheit, 35 degrees Celsius, high humidity, exhausted, your life in jeopardy, and this is the terrain that the Alabamans tried to scale to defeat the 20th Maine. On July 2nd, 1863, at this very site, here in the extreme flank of the Union Army, Colonel Strong Vincent brought his brigade and took up positions on Little Round Top here, just north of Big Round Top in the distance down there. He brought the 20th Maine. Looking for troops, he found the 20th Maine under the command of Colonel Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain. He brought Chamberlain and his 358 troops to this point on the extreme edge of Union forces. He said, "This is the line, defend it at all hazards." And at this location, the 20th Maine entered history books and mythology with a valiant stand here against repeated waves of Alabama troops who charged up this desperate hill in an effort to dislodge the Union troops based here under Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain and the 20th Maine. You can see the ground is quite difficult, challenging, and presents obstacles for an attacking army. For the defense, there was an advantage, but Chamberlain's regiment was exhausted from forced marches to get to Gettysburg, was full of soldiers who were about to be court-martialed for desertion, And it was a challenge for him nonetheless, just to get these troops into the field. I'm standing here on the saddle between Big Round Top to the south and Little Round Top behind me. This was the extreme flank of the Union Army on the 2nd of July, 1863, when Colonel Strong Vincent placed the 20th Maine Regiment under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain and told him to hold this spot at all hazard. As you can see, the terrain behind me is quite rocky, difficult, and quite an incline for people to get up and for soldiers to attack. On this spot, the 20th Maine found its way into the history books, in no small measure owing to the film Gettysburg, Jeff Daniels playing the role of Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain at this battle, and also because of Sherrard's book, The Killer Angels. But on this spot, the Alabamans came from Big Round Top, across the saddle, and charged up this hill repeatedly to unseat the 20th Maine, which was on the extreme flank of the Union Army. Had they been successful, the entire Union flank very likely would have collapsed, and perhaps Gettysburg would have been a very different result, with the Army of Northern Virginia having achieved a victory here on Northern soil. Alas, that is not what happened, as the valiant and gallant struggle and fight that took place here between the Alabamans and the 20th Maine on the 2nd of July, 1863, the Alabamans just kept coming. Blood everywhere, pools forming on the rocks, casualties laying all about, littered on this battlefield. Eventually, the 20th Maine began to run out of ammunition. In a bold, daring, and decisive move, Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain ordered his troops to fix bayonets, surmising that the Alabamans must be exhausted, they must be knackered at this point, and out of energy and unable to continue. The 20th Maine fixed bayonets and then charged down this hill. Coming down the hill into the Alabamans right in the saddle. It changed the course of history. This one spot, this one date in history, as the 20th Maine fought here to preserve the Union and end the institution of slavery. On the 2nd of July, 1863, 358 members of the 20th Maine fought this battle right on this very spot. In what is frequently known as the high water mark of the Confederacy, this is perhaps one of the most famous engagements in U.S. military history, with Pickett's charge. On the 3rd of July, 1863, at about 3 p.m., Major General George Pickett, with 5,000 troops under his command, and a combined force of 12,000 with Confederate Generals Pettigrew and Trimble, began the attack 3/4 of a mile away from here on the opposite side of that field, over in that tree line. The 12,000 Confederates advanced right into the dead center of the Union line in a desperate but foolhardy attempt on the part of General Robert E. Lee to break the center of the Union defenses, split the forces, and win the day. In what has become one of the most famous engagements in the history of military battles, what was known as Pickett's Charge, Confederate forces continued across this field, coming under withering artillery fire and rifle fire as they approached this point. The only brigade commander to pierce the line was Brigadier General Lewis Armistead. Just there in the front, to the left of those artillery pieces, is a scroll monument. That is the spot where General Armistead fell, mortally wounded. He and about 300 Confederate troops from his brigade had pierced the Union defenses and gotten this far. But there was little left behind them as the casualties mounted across the battlefield. In what is known as the high water mark of the Confederacy, this is the turning point in the Battle of Gettysburg and ultimately in the American Civil War, a conflict fought to preserve the Union and end the institution of slavery. At the site of Pickett's Charge, but also other desperate action took place here with Union artillery in an hour-and-a-half long artillery duel with Confederate artillery from the other side, 3/4 of a mile away. It was the heaviest cannonade yet seen for the Battle of Gettysburg. However, the artillery shells took quite a toll on Cushing's battery, Battery A, 4th United States Artillery, commanded by Lieutenant Alonzo H. Cushing, a 22-year-old. The ammunition boxes, the chest were blown apart, wheels blown off the artillery. By the time the Confederate forces began to break through the line here with General Lewis Armistead, you can see his scroll there where he fell mortally wounded, just to the left of the artillery pieces. By the time Confederate forces reached this position, there was only one cannon left in operation. Wounded in the shoulder and groin and upheld by a fellow officer, Cushing fired the last round of canister into the onrushing Confederates and then fell dead when a bullet entered his mouth. It was moments later when General Armistead's troops came over that wall And then, of course, Armistead fell mortally wounded just right in front of us. 150 years later, in 2013, Lieutenant Alonzo Cushing was decorated with the Congressional Medal of Honor for his gallant action here at Gettysburg, 150 years before. This is Chris. Thank you for having joined me here today for this virtual tour of the battlefield, the national battlefield for Gettysburg, a battle that took place from the 1st to the 3rd of July, 1863, a key engagement which ultimately was the high tide of the Confederacy and ultimately turned the Civil War in favor of the Union forces, although it took a further 2 years before the conflict ended. And hundreds of thousands of additional Americans lost their lives fighting to preserve the Union and end the institution of slavery. But I take great pride in being an American and our history and our heritage, things we don't run from, things we don't hide from. Far from a perfect nation, but nonetheless the greatest experiment in governance in the history of mankind. A nation where being an American is not an ethnicity, it's not a race, it's not a religion, it's an identity, an idea, an ideal. And we do hold these truths to be self-evident. I hope you enjoyed this virtual tour of Gettysburg with me as we try to remember, with the 157th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg just weeks away, and recognize the sacrifice of those who fought to preserve the Union here in Gettysburg in 1863. Thank you.